I just watched something rare happen in a Senate hearing room. A senator from the president's own party stood up and demanded real proof, not talking points. Thom Tillis spent decades doing actual corporate efficiency work, and he wasn't buying Russ Vaught's talk of $160 billion in savings. He asked one simple question the country's budget chief could not answer. Show me the receipts. What came back instead was silence, deflection, and scientists fired by the wrong email address. If the government can't do basic math, why should anyone believe a single number they've given us?
Senator Tillis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Vought, thank you for being here. Tell me the one DOGE initiative that you think is the best example of the work that was done before DOGE was quiesced in CFPB, or you can go anywhere else. But just give me the best example of what you thought was an exquisite realization of value that came through cuts that worked their way through the DOGE office.
Well, I do believe that the reductions in force as a tool.
Which specific one?
In general.
Yeah, but I want to get into specifics. You and I have different backgrounds. Mine was in enterprise implementation. I did this for a living. And so I don't want a word salad answer.
Well, it's not word salad, Senator. CFPB, I'm trying to do a reduction in force.
But I'm just asking you across the board. Give me one best, because here's what I'm asking for. The DOGE office has been quiesced, okay? But there were a lot of claims of billions and billions of dollars in savings. I simply want to know where you booked them and where I can see it.
I didn't run DOGE, Senator.
You are OMB, right?
I am, but I am not DOGE.
You do track to me, and when I worked in business and we had to implement efficiency, we got engaged to come in, do activity-based accounting, whatever was necessary to identify the efficiencies. Then we go to the CEOs and say, part of this is going to be a reduction in force. We're going to do this in a methodical manner. The number one thing we want to do is absolutely have a reduction in force that looks at our best and brightest, that 18 to 25% of the organization, and make damn sure that they don't get a "you're fired" notice. And then we would send out a reduction in force and an efficiencies program that does people, technology, and infrastructure. Give me an example of where that was done over the year that DOGE was in place.
Well, I think the extent to which we
because
shut down
let me
USAID.
back up. The reason I'm targeting you is because I look at you as the guy who books the savings. After we work, let's say we work with whatever department it is, then we got the savings, we come to you and we say, Mr. Vought, this is no longer going to be a part of our expense run rate. You can actually tell the administration that we can decrement that cost because we've cut the savings. Give me the best example of where DOGE has done that.
Well, I have been saying in terms of...
No, because give me the best example of where a DOGE initiative,
Senator,
once they completed the work, came to you and said, Mr. Vought, you should be aware that our baseline run rate for expenses have gone down. Give me one example.
We have an appropriations process, Senator.
I'm sorry?
There is an appropriations process. We have put forward a budget that's $160 billion in DOGE savings.
I've heard a lot of people, including you, talk about the DOGE savings. I've worked in the business world. My understanding is the last time you worked in the business world was at B. Dalton Books when you were putting yourself through law school. Good on you. But you don't have this experience, and a lot of people that were involved in this do not have this experience. I love the idea of DOGE, but what I don't love is the idea of DOGE shit that we're picking up because people did it wrong. I spell it with a $sign, by the way, Mr. Chair. But at the end of the day, we've got to be honest with the American people. We had people running through here and talking about all the savings. At the end of the day, book it. Every single one of these things should have before, after, net savings, and run rate for cost. And Mr. Vought, if you would submit for the record, I may have caught you flat-footed on this one, and I apologize for that.
You don't have to apologize.
But
there's $160 billion in savings
Mr. Vought,
that we
look,
identified.
this is going to be real simple. You don't have to do anything except present to me
I did, the budget.
a consultation for the record in written form, a consultation with the government agency that had the most documented and sustainable savings so that I can go back to North Carolina and explain where DOGE was successful. Because right now, I'm picking up a lot of bags of people who are some of the most experienced people leaving, scientists leaving NIH, These random, you were fired, oh, I'm sorry, you weren't, wrong email address. All that stuff is amateur stuff that would have gotten me fired in my job at Price Waterhouse in a week. I want to see, but I'm willing to be open to it. You got a best case. I love being proved wrong when I'm coming out and saying something that I'm very disappointed with. I would love nothing more than a briefing before this committee on the extraordinary work of identify the target, achieve the target, book the savings, and inform the appropriations process. I'd love to see at least one of those for the record. Thank you.
I want to walk you through what actually happened in that hearing room. On the surface, it looked like a routine budget exchange. Underneath, it was something much bigger, a test of whether a promise made to the country could survive one direct question. Senator Thom Tillis was not performing for the cameras. He spent years in the private sector doing exactly the kind of work he was now asking Russ Vought about. Real efficiency audits, real reduction in force planning, real cost accounting, line by line. So when he sat across from the director of the Office of Management and Budget, he asked for one thing. Not a speech, not a projection. One concrete example of DOGE savings that had actually been booked. He wasn't asking a gotcha question. He was asking the most basic question any auditor asks. Show me the number. Show me where it lives. Show me how you got there. When Vought answered in generalities, Tillis cut him off almost immediately. I don't want a word salad, he said. That single line tells you everything about the gap between the two men in that room. One had spent a career being graded on precision. The other, by his own admission, hadn't worked in the private sector since he was a law student stocking shelves at a bookstore. Tillis brought that up, not to embarrass him personally, but to make a point. Who actually understands how real savings get measured, and who is simply repeating numbers someone else handed them. Remember, DOGE was sold to the country as something different from ordinary Washington waist-cutting talk. It was supposed to run with private sector discipline, audited numbers, and receipts anyone could check. That promise is exactly what was being tested in that room. To understand why the question mattered, you need to understand what a real reduction in force is supposed to look like. In the private sector, you don't cut costs by firing people at random. You start with activity-based accounting, a methodical process that maps out exactly what each function costs, what value it produces, and where the waste is actually hiding. Only then do you design a targeted reduction. One that protects your best performers and removes genuine redundancy, not your most experienced people. Tillis described this from memory because he had lived it, down to the detail of protecting the top 18 to 25% of an organization from ever seeing a termination notice. He asked Vought for a single instance where DOGE had followed anything close to that discipline, start to finish, inside one agency. Vought couldn't. This is where a term worth unpacking comes in. Run rate. It's simply the ongoing cost of running a function, measured before a change and after it. When a company claims it saved money, the proof isn't a press release. It's a documented drop in that run rate, verified, dated, and traceable to a specific decision. That's what book it means. It means turning a claim into a line item that anyone can audit later, not a number that only lives in a speech. Vought pointed instead to $160 billion in proposed Department of Defense savings, tied to what he called the appropriations process. That phrase is doing a lot of work in that sentence, so let's unpack it too. The appropriations process is how Congress legally funds the government, agency by agency, year by year. A number inside a proposed budget is a request. At best, it's a projection. It is not a completed transaction. One is a plan. The other is proof. Confusing the two lets officials claim credit today for results that may never fully materialize. Think about what would happen if a public company tried this trick on its shareholders. If a CEO stood up at an earnings call and announced billions in savings with no audited number behind it, that isn't spin. That's the kind of claim that draws a call from the Securities and Exchange Commission. Independent auditors exist precisely because self-reported savings, from a company or from a government, can't be trusted just because someone in charge says so. Government doesn't have an SEC for this exact problem, but it has something built for the same purpose. There is a law written for exactly this scenario, called the Impoundment Control Act of 1974. It requires the executive branch to spend money Congress has already approved, unless it follows a specific public process to withhold it. And there is a nonpartisan watchdog built to enforce that law, the Government Accountability Office. When an agency claims savings without ever showing how those savings were achieved, that watchdog exists precisely to ask the question Tillis asked in that room. Where is the money, and who signed off on taking it? When that question goes unanswered long enough, oversight stops being a check on power and becomes a formality everyone quietly ignores. That's not a small thing. That's the difference between a government that answers to the people who fund it and one that simply expects to be believed. And once one administration gets away with unverified numbers, the next one, from either party, learns the same shortcut works. That's how a one-time excuse quietly becomes a permanent habit. Now think about who actually pays for that silence. Somewhere inside the National Institutes of Health, a scientist who had spent 15 years chasing treatment for a disease opened her inbox one morning to a termination notice. It wasn't even addressed to her. It had gone out to the wrong email entirely, one line in a mass deletion nobody bothered to double-check. Her research didn't get a transition plan. It just stopped. Somewhere, a patient waiting on that research never finds out how close it actually was. That is not efficiency. Tillis called it amateur work, the kind that gets you fired in a week at a real accounting firm. And he's right. Because you don't rebuild 15 years of institutional knowledge by posting a new job listing. Research pauses, grants stall, studies tracking disease outbreaks lose momentum, sometimes for good. None of that shows up in a budget spreadsheet, but it shows up everywhere else. So what's the actual lesson here? Efficiency and recklessness can look identical in a press release, but they are not the same thing. Real reform earns trust through a simple cascade. In Tillis's own words, identify the target, achieve the target, book the savings, inform the appropriations process. Skip any one of those 4 steps, and the number you're bragging about is not a saving, it's a guess wearing a suit. That should concern you no matter your politics. Because the next unverified number or the next person let go without warning might not make headlines the way this one did. Tillis ended the exchange by asking for something remarkably modest. One documented example, submitted for the record, that he could take home and defend. Not a talking point, not a projection. One real example in writing. Submitting something for the record isn't a courtesy. It's a formal promise that becomes part of the permanent congressional file. It can be checked years later by any senator from any party at any hearing that follows. That's exactly why officials so often promise it in the moment and so rarely follow through once the cameras are off. And that gap between what gets promised on camera and what actually lands in the record is where public trust quietly goes to die. It doesn't collapse all at once. It erodes one unanswered question at a time, one hearing at a time, until nobody expects an answer at all. If an administration spent months telling the country it found hundreds of billions in waste, producing a single verified case should not be hard. The fact that it apparently is tells you almost everything you need to know about how much of this was ever actually measured to begin with. Government accountability does not live in a press conference. It lives in the paperwork, the audits, and the willingness to let a stranger check your math. No receipts, no trail, no trust. And when that willingness disappears, so does the public's ability to believe anything it's told, no matter who is doing the telling. So the next time you hear a number like $160 billion in savings, ask the question Tillis asked. Where's the receipt? Because until someone can show it to you, it isn't a fact. It's just a claim wearing the costume of one.